I woke up on a freezing February morning in Naperville, Illinois, looked out my bedroom window, and saw my entire front lawn covered in what looked like a salt mine explosion. The pristine green grass I had spent 3 years cultivating was completely buried under thick white crystals that sparkled menacingly in the early sunlight. My heart dropped into my stomach as I realized this was not snow. I threw on my winter coat over my pajamas and ran outside barefoot, the cold pavement shocking my senses awake. The temperature hovered around 15 degrees, and my breath came out in angry white puffs as I knelt down to examine the disaster. Rock salt, probably 50 pounds of it, had been dumped across my entire front yard in massive piles that spread from the sidewalk to my front door. I touched the crystals and brought them to my lips. Definitely salt, the kind used for melting ice on driveways and walkways. My grass underneath was already starting to turn brown in spots where the salt had eaten through the protective layer of snow we had gotten the night before. I stood up and looked around the neighborhood. My house was the only one with this salt catastrophe. Every other lawn on Maple Ridge Drive looked perfectly normal, covered in the light dusting of snow that had fallen overnight. The sun was just coming up, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street. I had moved into this neighborhood 3 years ago, right after my divorce was finalized, and I had poured my heart and soul into making this house feel like home. The lawn had been one of my pride and joy projects, something I could control when everything else in my life felt chaotic. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures from every angle. The piles of salt were concentrated near the sidewalk and the edges of my driveway, but whoever had done this had also thrown handfuls across the middle of the yard. I could see footprints in the snow leading from the sidewalk across my lawn and back again. Size 7 or 8 shoes, definitely not large prints. My detective work was interrupted by a voice calling from across the street. "They got you too, huh?" It was Martin, my neighbor from the house directly opposite mine. He was standing on his porch with a coffee mug wrapped in a thick flannel robe. I walked across the street, my feet now completely numb from the cold. "What do you mean, got me too?" Martin shook his head and took a sip of his coffee. "The HOA has been going around dumping salt on lawns they think are violating some new winter maintenance rule. You are the third house this week. The Johnsons got hit on Monday, and the Patel family got it on Wednesday. I think they are targeting people they have had disputes with." My mind raced back through the past few months. I had received exactly 3 notices from the Homeowners Association since November. The first was about my trash cans being visible from the street after 8 in the morning on a non-pickup day, which was ridiculous because I had brought them in at 7:45, and someone from the HOA must have driven by in that 15-minute window. The second notice was about my holiday decorations being up past January 15th, even though I had taken them down on January 14th, and the notice was dated January 13th. The third notice had arrived just last week, complaining that my driveway had not been properly cleared of snow within 24 hours of the last snowfall. That last notice had really gotten under my skin because I had cleared my driveway within 12 hours. I had even time-stamped photos to prove it. I had sent a detailed response to the HOA board explaining that I was in full compliance and requesting that they stop sending me frivolous violations. I guess someone did not appreciate my pushback. "Who is doing this?" I asked Martin, my teeth starting to chatter. "Word on the street is Brenda Morrison is behind it. She got elected HOA president in December and has been on a power trip ever since. She has this new thing where she thinks every property needs to have salt applied to all walkways and the first 5 feet of lawn adjacent to sidewalks for safety reasons. It is complete nonsense, but she has been using it to harass people she does not like. Brenda Morrison, of course." I had met Brenda exactly once, at the HOA annual meeting in November, right before she was elected president. She was a 52-year-old woman with a blonde bob haircut that looked like it required a daily appointment with a stylist, perfectly manicured nails, and an expression that suggested she had been sucking on lemons for the past decade. She had cornered me after the meeting to inform me that my lawn looked patchy and that I should consider hiring a professional service. I had politely told her that I preferred to maintain my own lawn and that I was quite happy with how it looked. She had given me a tight smile and said something about how not everyone had the expertise to maintain a property in a neighborhood like Maple Ridge Estates. I thanked Martin and hurried back across the street to my house. My feet were beyond numb now, bordering on painful. I got inside, peeled off my wet socks, and ran my feet under warm water until the feeling came back. Then I made myself a strong pot of coffee and sat down at my kitchen table to figure out my next move. The HOA covenants were in a thick binder I kept in my home office. I had read through them carefully when I bought the house, and I had reviewed them again each time I received a violation notice. I flipped through the winter maintenance section and found absolutely nothing about salt application requirements. There was a clause about keeping walkways clear of ice and snow within 24 hours of precipitation, but nothing that required salt application to lawns. In fact, there was a section about lawn care that specifically prohibited the application of chemicals or substances that could damage turf grass without prior approval from the HOA board. I smiled grimly. Brenda had just violated the very covenants she was supposed to be enforcing. I spent the next hour documenting everything. Photos from every conceivable angle, close-ups of the salt crystals, shots of the footprints in the snow, pictures of my neighbors' untouched lawns for comparison. I pulled up the weather data for the past week to show that I had cleared my driveway in compliance with the rules. I drafted a detailed letter to the HOA board explaining the situation and demanding immediate remediation. By the time I finished, it was 8 in the morning. I called in to work and told my manager I would be late due to a home emergency. Then I got dressed properly and headed outside to see if I could minimize the damage. The problem with salt on grass in winter is that it does not just sit there. As the temperature fluctuates, the salt dissolves and seeps into the soil, killing the grass from the roots up. The only solution is to try to remove as much salt as possible before it has a chance to fully dissolve, and then flush the area with water to dilute what remains. I grabbed a snow shovel and started carefully scooping up the large piles of salt. It was backbreaking work. The salt had already started to melt and refreeze overnight, creating crusty chunks that clung to the grass beneath. I filled 3 large contractor bags with salt and ice, working methodically across the entire front yard. My back was screaming by the time I finished, and my hands were raw despite the thick gloves I was wearing. Next came the water. I hooked up my garden hose to the outdoor spigot and prayed the pipes had not frozen. The water came out in a blessed stream, and I spent another hour spraying down every inch of the affected grass, trying to flush the salt residue out of the soil. The water ran off into the street in dirty white rivulets, carrying the dissolved salt with it. I could only hope I had acted fast enough. By the time I was done, it was nearly 11 in the morning. I was exhausted, freezing, and furious. I took a hot shower, changed into clean clothes, and drove directly to the HOA management office on the other side of Naperville. The Maple Ridge Estates HOA was managed by a company called Premier Community Management. Their office was in a bland business park off Route 59, sandwiched between an insurance agency and a physical therapy clinic. I walked in to find a young receptionist sitting behind a desk, typing away at her computer. I need to speak with someone about an HOA issue, I said, trying to keep my voice level. She looked up with a practiced customer service smile. Do you have an appointment? No, but this is urgent. Someone from my HOA dumped approximately 50 pounds of rock salt on my lawn last night, killing my grass. I need to speak with whoever manages Maple Ridge Estates immediately. Her smile faltered. Let me get the property manager. Just one moment. She disappeared into a back office and returned a minute later with a tired-looking man in his 40s wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt. He introduced himself as Doug Patterson, the property manager for Maple Ridge Estates. I explained the entire situation while Doug listened with an increasingly concerned expression. When I showed him the photos on my phone, he actually winced. This is not an approved HOA activity, he said firmly. We would never authorize the application of salt to lawns. That is destructive and completely against your community covenants. Can you email me these photos and your written statement? I sent him everything right there from my phone. He pulled it up on his computer and scrolled through the images, shaking his head. I am going to contact the board president immediately. This is completely unacceptable. In the meantime, I recommend you get an estimate from a professional landscaper for the cost of remediation and restoration. Keep all your receipts for any expenses you incur trying to fix this. I want the HOA to pay for all damages, I said. This was done either by a board member or someone acting on behalf of the board. My neighbor told me 2 other houses were hit this week with the same thing. Doug's expression darkened. I was not aware of any other incidents. Can you provide me with the addresses? I gave him the Johnson's address and the Patel's address, as Martin had mentioned. Doug wrote everything down and promised to investigate immediately. He gave me his direct phone number and email and told me to keep him updated on any developments. I left the office feeling slightly better. At least the management company seemed to take this seriously. But I knew the real battle was going to be with Brenda Morrison and whatever board members were backing her up. When I got home, there was a new notice stuck to my front door. I ripped it off and read it in disbelief. It was a violation notice for excessive water runoff into the street, dated today at 10:30 in the morning. The time when I had been hosing down my lawn trying to save my grass from the salt they had dumped. The sheer audacity made my blood boil. I took a picture of the notice and immediately emailed it to Doug Patterson with a brief explanation. His response came back within 5 minutes. This is harassment. I am calling an emergency board meeting. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and research. I called 3 different landscaping companies and scheduled estimates for the following day. I researched Illinois HOA law and found that HOAs could be held liable for property damage caused by their actions or the actions of their agents. I also discovered that if the HOA refused to pay for damages, I could file a claim in small claims court for up to $10,000, which would more than cover any lawn restoration costs. That evening, I got a phone call from an unknown local number. I answered cautiously. Is this David Chen? A woman's voice, sharp and irritated. Yes, this is David. This is Brenda Morrison, president of the Maple Ridge Estates HOA. I received a very disturbing call from our property manager today making wild accusations about salt being dumped on your lawn. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice calm. They are not wild accusations, Brenda. Someone dumped approximately 50 pounds of rock salt on my lawn last night, killing my grass. I have extensive photographic evidence, and I know 2 other homeowners were targeted with the same vandalism this week. Vandalism, her voice went up an octave. I can assure you that the HOA does not engage in vandalism. However, I will point out that there is a winter maintenance requirement in our covenants that requires salt application for safety purposes. Perhaps someone was trying to help you comply with the rules. There is no such requirement in the covenants, I shot back. I have read them cover to cover. And even if there were, there is a specific prohibition against applying substances that damage turf grass. You know what damages turf grass? 50 pounds of rock salt. I think you are blowing this out of proportion, Brenda said icily. A little salt never hurt anyone. Your lawn will be fine in the spring. A little salt. Brenda, my entire front lawn is destroyed. I am getting professional estimates tomorrow, and I expect the HOA to pay for full restoration. The HOA will not be paying for anything. If you have a problem with your lawn, that is your responsibility as a homeowner. Then I will see you in court, I said and hung up. My hands were shaking. I had never been a confrontational person. My ex-wife used to complain that I was too passive, too willing to let things slide to avoid conflict, but this was different. This was my home, my property, and someone had deliberately destroyed something I had worked hard to create. I was not going to let it slide. The next morning, 3 different landscaping companies came to assess the damage. The first was a large commercial operation that gave me a quote of $4,000 for complete lawn replacement. The second was a smaller local company that quoted $3,000. The third was a specialist in lawn restoration who examined my grass carefully, took soil samples, and delivered the bad news I had been dreading. His name was Tom Rodriguez, and he had been in the lawn care business for 25 years. He crouched down in several spots across my yard, digging small samples and examining the grass roots. The salt has penetrated deep into the soil, he said, showing me a sample where the roots were brown and dead. You caught it early, which is good, but there is still significant damage. The grass is not going to recover on its own. You are going to need to remove the top layer of soil, treat the remaining soil to neutralize the salt, and then resod the entire front yard. How much is that going to cost? Tom did some calculations on his tablet. For a yard this size with the soil treatment and premium sod, I would estimate $2,100. That includes removal and disposal of the damaged soil and grass, soil treatment, new sod installation, and a month of follow-up care to make sure everything establishes properly. It was the middle quote, and Tom seemed the most knowledgeable about the specific issue of salt damage. I asked him to send me a formal written estimate, which he did before he left. I forwarded all 3 estimates to Doug Patterson at the management company and requested that the HOA cover the costs. I chose Tom's quote as the one I wanted to proceed with, assuming the HOA would pay. Doug called me that afternoon. I presented your claim to the board at an emergency meeting this morning. I am afraid I have bad news. Brenda Morrison and 2 other board members voted to deny your claim. They are maintaining that the HOA did not authorize any salt application and therefore bears no responsibility, even though it only happened to people who have had disputes with Brenda. I pointed that out. The 2 other board members, Karen Whitfield and Susan Chen, no relation I assume, backed Brenda completely. The remaining 2 board members, Mike Torres and Jennifer Lee, voted to approve your claim, but they were outvoted 3-2. I felt my jaw clench. Then I will take this to small claims court. That is certainly your right, Doug said. For what it is worth, I think you have a strong case. I am documenting everything on our end. This is not how an HOA should operate. I thanked Doug and hung up. Then I did something I had never done before. I created a post on the Maple Ridge Estates neighborhood Facebook group, which had about 200 members. I laid out the entire situation, posted the photos of my salt-covered lawn, shared the footprint evidence, and explained that the HOA had refused to take responsibility. I tagged the post with information about how other homeowners could report similar incidents. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, I had 50 comments. The Johnsons confirmed they had experienced the exact same thing. The Patels shared their photos. 3 other homeowners came forward to say they had found salt on their lawns, but had not realized it was deliberate. All of them had received violation notices from Brenda Morrison in the weeks before the salt appeared. One comment in particular caught my attention. It was from a homeowner named Rachel Kim, who lived on the other side of the neighborhood. She wrote, "Brenda Morrison came to my house last month and told me I needed to apply salt to my lawn for safety reasons. I told her that sounded like it would damage my grass and refused. She got very angry and said I was being difficult. I did not have salt dumped on my lawn, but I think it is because I caught her on my doorbell camera and she knew I would have evidence. That gave me an idea. I checked my own doorbell camera footage from the night before, but my camera angle did not cover the lawn, only the porch and front door. However, I walked down the street to the Johnsons' house and knocked on their door. Henry Johnson answered, a retired engineer in his 70s. I had met him a few times at neighborhood events. "David, I saw your Facebook post," he said immediately. "I am glad someone is finally standing up to that woman. Come in." Henry's wife, Margaret, brought me coffee while Henry pulled up his doorbell camera footage from the night their lawn had been salted. The video was grainy and dark, but it clearly showed a figure approaching their lawn around 2 in the morning. The figure was wearing a dark coat and carrying a large bag. They spread salt across the entire front yard methodically, then walked away down the sidewalk. "Did you report this to the police?" I asked. Henry shook his head. "We thought about it, but we were not sure who it was. The video quality is not good enough to identify the person, and frankly, we were worried about retaliation from the HOA. Can you send me this video? I am building a case." Henry sent me the video file and I thanked him and Margaret for their help. I had one more stop to make. I drove across town to a legal aid office that offered free consultations on civil matters. The lawyer I met with was a sharp young woman named Lisa Park, who specialized in HOA disputes. I laid out the entire situation, showed her the evidence, and explained that the HOA had refused to pay for damages. Lisa reviewed everything carefully. "You have an excellent case for small claims court. The evidence is clear that someone deliberately dumped salt on your lawn, causing significant damage. The pattern of targeting homeowners who have had disputes with the HOA president establishes a motive. The HOA's refusal to investigate or take responsibility, despite being informed of the issue, shows negligence at minimum. However, there is something more serious going on here." "What do you mean?" "What you are describing could constitute criminal mischief or property damage under Illinois law. The deliberate destruction of property valued at over $500 is a misdemeanor. If this is part of a pattern of harassment, it could potentially be elevated to a more serious charge. You should consider filing a police report." I had not thought about involving the police. It seemed like such a dramatic escalation. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. This was not just an HOA dispute. This was deliberate property destruction. I left Lisa's office and drove directly to the Naperville Police Department. The officer at the front desk directed me to a Detective James Williams who handled property crime cases. I waited for 20 minutes before being called back to a small interview room. Detective Williams was a stocky African-American man in his early 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. I explained the entire situation for what felt like the 100th time and showed him all my evidence. He took notes and asked detailed questions about the timeline, the HOA violations, and the other affected homeowners. "This is definitely criminal mischief at minimum," he said when I finished. "The dollar value of the damage puts it in the misdemeanor range. The pattern you are describing suggests this could be part of a harassment campaign, which complicates things. Do you have any direct evidence linking Brenda Morrison to the salt dumping? Not direct evidence, no, but the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. Only homeowners who have had disputes with her have been targeted. One neighbor reported that Brenda tried to convince her to salt her own lawn and got angry when she refused. Circumstantial evidence can build a case, but we need something more concrete for charges. Let me start by interviewing the other affected homeowners and seeing if anyone has better video evidence or witnessed anything. I will also reach out to the HOA management company. In the meantime, proceed with your landscaping repairs and keep all receipts. If we can establish criminal liability, you may be entitled to restitution beyond just the civil damages. I left the police station feeling like I was finally being taken seriously. This was not just a neighborhood squabble anymore. This was a criminal investigation. Over the next week, things moved quickly. Tom Rodriguez began work on my lawn, removing the damaged soil and grass. The sight of my front yard torn up and barren was depressing, but Tom assured me that the new sod would establish quickly once the weather warmed up. The total came to exactly $2,100, just as quoted. Detective Williams interviewed all the affected homeowners and reviewed all available video evidence. While none of the videos were clear enough to definitively identify Brenda Morrison, the detective was able to establish that the same person appeared to be responsible for all the salt dumping incidents based on body type and movement patterns. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A homeowner named Richard Stevenson, who lived 3 doors down from me, came forward with information. Richard was a quiet guy who mostly kept to himself, but he had been at the November HOA meeting where Brenda was elected president. He told Detective Williams that he had overheard Brenda talking to Karen Whitfield after the meeting about teaching certain homeowners a lesson and making sure people understand the importance of following the rules. More importantly, Richard had seen Brenda Morrison's car, a distinctive silver Mercedes SUV with a custom license plate that read "Boss Lady," parked on our street at 2:30 in the morning on the night my lawn was salted. He had been up late working on a project in his garage and had stepped outside for some air. He had thought it was odd at the time, but had not connected it to the salt dumping until he saw my Facebook post. Armed with this information, Detective Williams obtained a search warrant for Brenda Morrison's property. The search uncovered 3 large bags of rock salt in her garage, the same brand that matched the salt taken from my lawn and the Johnsons' lawn. They also found a handwritten list of addresses, including mine, the Johnsons, and the Patels, along with notes about non-compliant homeowners and enforcement actions needed. Brenda Morrison was arrested on March 10th and charged with 5 counts of criminal mischief, 1 count of criminal trespass, and 1 count of harassment. The story made the local Naperville news, complete with footage of Brenda being led out of her house in handcuffs while protesting loudly that she was being persecuted for just trying to maintain community standards. The HOA board held an emergency meeting the day after Brenda's arrest. Karen Whitfield and Susan Chen both resigned immediately, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the scandal. Mike Torres and Jennifer Lee remained on the board and called for a special election to fill the vacant positions. In the meantime, they voted unanimously to approve payment for all damages caused by the salt dumping incidents, including my $2,100 landscaping bill. I received a formal letter of apology from the HOA board and a check for $2,100 within a week. The letter acknowledged that Brenda Morrison had been acting outside her authority as HOA president and that her actions were in direct violation of the community covenants. They also announced a full review of HOA procedures to prevent similar abuses in the future. But the story was not quite over yet. Brenda Morrison's criminal case moved forward through the court system. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been acting in her official capacity as HOA president to enforce community rules, but the prosecution easily demolished that defense. They presented the evidence that there was no rule requiring SALT application, that Brenda had deliberately targeted homeowners she had personal disputes with, and that she had caused thousands of dollars in property damage. In late April, Brenda Morrison appeared before a judge and pleaded guilty to 5 counts of criminal mischief in exchange for the other charges being dropped. She was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to all the affected homeowners. The total restitution came to over $12,000, covering not just the direct repair costs, but also court fees and compensation for time lost from work dealing with the situation. As part of her probation terms, Brenda was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Illinois. The judge made a point of noting in his sentencing remarks that HOAs exist to serve their communities, not to enable personal vendettas, and that abuse of authority would not be tolerated. The special HOA election in May brought in 3 new board members, including Martin from across the street and Henry Johnson. The new board immediately voted to rescind all the frivolous violation notices that Brenda had issued during her tenure, and to implement a new appeals process for homeowners who felt they had been unfairly cited. By June, my new lawn was fully established and looking better than ever. Tom Rodriguez had done excellent work, and the premium sod he used was a beautiful deep green that made my yard the envy of the neighborhood. I had learned a lot through the whole ordeal, mostly that standing up for yourself matters, even when it feels uncomfortable. One Saturday afternoon in early June, I was outside mowing my beautiful new lawn when Martin walked over with a couple of cold beers. We sat on my front porch and watched the sun set over Maple Ridge Drive. "You know, you really changed this neighborhood," Martin said. "Before you stood up to Brenda, everyone was just quietly putting up with her nonsense. Now we have a functional HOA that actually works for the community instead of against it." I took a sip of my beer and smiled. I just wanted my grass back. "Yeah, but you got a lot more than that. You got justice." He was right. The whole experience had been stressful and frustrating and had taken up hours of my time over several months. But in the end, the system had worked. The HOA had been held accountable, the person responsible had faced real consequences, and I had been fully compensated for my damages. A few weeks later, I received one final piece of mail related to the whole saga. It was a handwritten note from Brenda Morrison, clearly written as part of her court-ordered restitution requirements. The note was brief and stilted, clearly written under duress. "I apologize for the damage caused to your lawn. My actions were inappropriate and violated community standards. I hope your lawn has been restored to your satisfaction." There was no signature, just her name printed at the bottom. I read it once, then filed it away with all the other documents from the case. I did not need her apology. What I needed was exactly what I had gotten: my lawn restored, my property rights respected, and the assurance that no one else in the neighborhood would have to go through what I went through. The summer passed peacefully. I spent my weekends working in my yard, planting flowers and maintaining my beautiful new lawn. I got to know more of my neighbors, many of whom stopped by to thank me for standing up to Brenda. The neighborhood felt different now, more like a real community instead of a collection of people living in fear of HOA citations. In August, the new HOA board organized a neighborhood block party, the first one in years. It was held on a Saturday afternoon on Maple Ridge Drive, with tables of food and drinks set up along the street. Kids played in the yards, neighbors caught up with each other. And for the first time since I had moved in, the neighborhood felt genuinely welcoming. Henry Johnson gave a short speech thanking everyone for coming together as a community. He mentioned, without naming names, how the neighborhood had been through a difficult period, but had emerged stronger. He talked about the importance of HOAs serving their communities rather than controlling them. And he ended by proposing a toast to good neighbors and healthy lawns. Everyone laughed and raised their drinks. I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, people I had only known in passing before all this happened, and felt a genuine sense of belonging. This was my home, this was my community, and I had fought to protect it. As the party wound down and the sun began to set, I found myself back on my front porch, looking out at my lawn. The grass was thick and green, swaying gently in the warm evening breeze. You would never know that just 5 months ago it had been destroyed by malicious intent. It had come back stronger and healthier than before. I thought about the moment I had looked out my window that cold February morning and seen the salt covering my yard. In that moment, I had felt violated and helpless. But I had made a choice to fight back, to document everything, to demand accountability, and to see the process through to the end. It had been the right choice. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister in California. She had been following the whole saga from afar and had been one of my biggest supporters throughout the ordeal. The text read, "Saw your Facebook post about the block party. Your lawn looks amazing. Proud of you, little bro." I smiled and typed back, "Thanks, it was a long road but worth it." The truth was, it had been worth it. Not just because I got my lawn back or because the HOA paid for the damages. It was worth it because I had learned something important about myself. I was not the passive person my ex-wife had accused me of being. When something mattered enough, I could fight for it. I could stand up to bullies, navigate bureaucratic systems, work with lawyers and police, and see justice done. The experience had also taught me about the importance of community. Without neighbors like Martin, Henry, and Rachel Kim coming forward with information and support, I might not have had a strong enough case. Without Doug Patterson at the management company taking my complaint seriously, the HOA board might have succeeded in stonewalling me. Without Detective Williams treating the case as a real crime rather than just a neighborhood dispute, Brenda Morrison might never have faced real consequences. As fall approached and the weather began to cool, I started thinking about what the next winter would bring. I had no illusions that HOA life would be perfect from now on. There would still be rules to follow, occasional disputes about violations, and the general bureaucratic frustrations that come with living in a managed community. But at least now, the HOA was operating within reasonable bounds, with accountability and oversight. In October, I received an invitation to apply for one of the open positions on the HOA board. Jennifer Lee was stepping down due to work commitments, and the board was looking for engaged homeowners to fill the vacancy. I thought about it for a few days before declining. I had no interest in being part of the HOA governance structure. I just wanted to live my life, maintain my property, and be left alone to enjoy my home. Instead, I recommended Rachel Kim for the position. She had been vocal about HOA reform after the whole salt dumping scandal came to light, and she had the organizational skills and even temperament to be effective on the board. She was elected unanimously and immediately pushed through several common-sense reforms to make the HOA more transparent and responsive to homeowner concerns. November brought the anniversary of Brenda Morrison's election as HOA president, a position she had held for less than 4 months before her arrest. The contrast between the neighborhood then and now was stark. A year ago, people had been walking on eggshells, afraid of receiving frivolous violation notices. Now, People actually looked forward to HOA meetings because they knew their concerns would be heard and addressed fairly. I attended the November HOA meeting out of curiosity. It was held in the community room of a local church, the same venue where Brenda had been elected a year earlier. The atmosphere was completely different. Rachel Kim presented a financial report showing that the HOA had actually saved money by reducing the number of frivolous enforcement actions and legal disputes. Martin reported on upcoming community events. Mike Torres discussed plans for neighborhood beautification projects in the spring. During the open comment period, several homeowners stood up to share positive experiences with the new board. One woman talked about how the board had worked with her to find a solution when she needed to make repairs to her house that technically required HOA approval. Instead of the adversarial process she had feared, the board had been helpful and accommodating. Another homeowner praised the new appeals process, which had allowed him to contest a violation notice and have it rescinded when he provided evidence of compliance. As I drove home that night, I felt satisfied. The system was working the way it was supposed to work. The HOA was serving the community instead of the other way around. December brought snow and with it, a moment of anxiety. I watched the weather forecast calling for 6 inches of accumulation and felt a flash of the old stress about making sure my driveway was cleared in time to avoid a violation notice. But then I reminded myself that the new HOA board was reasonable. They were not looking for excuses to cite people. They were just trying to maintain basic community standards. I cleared my driveway the morning after the snowfall, and I did not receive any violation notices. I did, however, receive a cheerful email from the HOA board reminding all homeowners about the 24-hour clearance rule and offering resources for homeowners who needed help with snow removal due to age or disability. It was a perfect example of how an HOA should communicate with its members. Christmas came and went peacefully. I put up my decorations on December 1st and took them down on January 2nd, well within the HOA guidelines. I did not worry about someone scrutinizing my compliance or looking for reasons to cite me. I just enjoyed the holidays. January brought the resolution of the final legal matters related to Brenda Morrison. Her probation was proceeding uneventfully, according to Detective Williams, who checked in with me periodically to update me on the case status. Brenda had completed about 30 hours of her community service requirement and was making her restitution payments on schedule. She had moved out of Maple Ridge Estates in September, selling her house quietly and relocating to another part of the state. Karen Whitfield and Susan Chen, the 2 board members who had supported Brenda's denial of my damage claim, had also moved away. Karen's house sold in November and Susan's house went on the market in December. The neighborhood gossip was that they were embarrassed to stay after the scandal, though no one knew for sure. Either way, their departure felt like a closing of a chapter. February arrived, bringing with it the 1-year anniversary of the morning I had woken up to find my lawn covered in salt. I looked out my bedroom window on that anniversary morning and saw a pristine white coating of fresh snow across a healthy, dormant lawn. The grass underneath was strong and ready to green up again in the spring. I thought about how much had changed in a year. I had gone from being a quiet, non-confrontational homeowner to someone who had taken on the HOA, filed a police report, and seen a criminal case through to conviction. I had gone from being just another face in the neighborhood to being someone people knew and respected. I had gone from feeling like a victim to feeling empowered. The experience had cost me time, stress, and emotional energy. But it had also given me something valuable. It had given me confidence in myself and in the systems that are supposed to protect people from abuses of power. It had shown me that standing up for what is right actually works, even when it feels daunting. In early March, I received a final check from Brenda Morrison's restitution payments. It was for $350, representing additional compensation beyond the initial $2,100 landscaping bill. The court had determined that I was entitled to compensation for the time I had spent dealing with the situation, including hours off work, time spent documenting evidence, and the emotional distress caused by the harassment. I deposited the check and then did something I had been thinking about for a while. I donated $500 to a local legal aid organization that helps homeowners with HOA disputes. I knew from my own experience how overwhelming and intimidating it could be to fight back against an HOA, especially without legal resources. If my donation could help someone else navigate a similar situation, it would be worth it. Spring arrived in full force in late March, and my lawn exploded with new growth. The grass that Tom Rodriguez had installed the previous year was now fully established and thriving. It was thick, green, and absolutely beautiful. Neighbors commented on it regularly, and I took pride in maintaining it perfectly. I was outside mowing one Saturday afternoon in early April when a car pulled up in front of my house. A man got out and walked over, introducing himself as a reporter from the Naperville Sun, the local newspaper. He said he was doing a follow-up story on the HOA salt dumping case and wanted to interview me about the resolution. I hesitated for a moment, then agreed. We sat on my front porch, and I told him the whole story from beginning to end. He took notes and asked thoughtful questions about what I had learned from the experience and what advice I would give to other homeowners facing similar situations. Document everything, I told him. Take photos, save emails, keep records of every interaction. If you think something is wrong, trust your instincts and pursue it. Do not be afraid to escalate to the police if the situation warrants it, and do not let anyone intimidate you out of standing up for your rights. The article ran the following week, with the headline "Homeowners Fight Against HOA Overreach Leads to Criminal Conviction." It was a fair and balanced piece that laid out the facts of the case and included comments from Detective Williams, Doug Patterson from the management company, and several of my neighbors. The article ended with a quote from me. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining property values and community standards, but they have to operate within the law and respect homeowner rights. When they cross that line, homeowners have to be willing to fight back. The article generated a lot of discussion in the community. Several people reached out to me with their own HOA horror stories, some of which were even worse than mine. I listened and offered advice where I could, always emphasizing the importance of documentation and knowing your rights. By summer, life had settled into a comfortable routine. My lawn was the pride of the neighborhood. My relationship with the HOA was cordial and professional, and I felt genuinely happy in my home. The experience with Brenda Morrison had been terrible while it was happening, but in retrospect, it had made me a stronger person and had improved the entire community. One evening in late June, I hosted a barbecue in my backyard. I invited a dozen neighbors, including Martin, Henry and Margaret Johnson, Rachel Kim, and several other people I had gotten to know over the past year. We grilled burgers and hot dogs, drank cold beer, and told stories as the sun set over the neighborhood. At one point, Henry raised his beer and offered a toast. To David Chen, who had the courage to stand up to a bully and make this neighborhood a better place for all of us. Everyone raised their drinks and cheered. I felt my face flush with embarrassment but also with pride. I had not set out to be a hero or a neighborhood activist. I had just wanted my grass back. But sometimes, fighting for something small and personal ends up making a difference for everyone. As the party wound down and people started heading home, Martin hung back to help me clean up. We worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, gathering paper plates and empty bottles. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Martin said as we loaded trash into a garbage bag. "What is that?" "You proved that the system can work if you are willing to work the system. A lot of people just complain about HOAs or bad board members but never actually do anything about it. You did something about it, and look at the result. We have a functional HOA now, the neighborhood is better, and Brenda Morrison is banned from ever doing this to anyone else." He was right. The system had worked. It had not been easy or quick, but it had worked. The HOA had ultimately paid for the damages. The criminal justice system had held the person responsible accountable. The community had come together to support reform. All of it had happened because I had been willing to document the problem, report it to the proper authorities, and see the process through to the end. As I went to bed that night, I thought about the journey I had been on over the past 16 months. From the shock and anger of that February morning when I discovered my salt-covered lawn, through the frustration of dealing with HOA stonewalling, to the satisfaction of seeing justice done and my lawn restored. It had been a long and sometimes difficult road, but I had come out the other side stronger and more confident. My final thought before falling asleep was about the $2,100 landscaping bill that the HOA had ultimately paid. That money represented more than just the cost of repairing my lawn. It represented accountability, justice, and the principle that no one, not even an HOA president, is above the law. It represented the idea that homeowners have rights and that those rights matter. And it represented the power of ordinary people to stand up to abuses of authority and make things right. The grass outside my window was healthy and green, swaying gently in the warm summer breeze. Tomorrow I would water it, maintaining the beautiful lawn that had been restored after being destroyed. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully, knowing that I had fought for what was right and won.